In 1959, this tiny 16-acre rock was home to over 5,000 residents. Owned entirely by Mitsubishi, it was a self-contained corporate island boasting a population density nearly 9 times greater than that of Tokyo. Driven by Japan's industrialization, families lived in the country's very first reinforced concrete high-rises. They raised children on rooftop gardens and bought the latest in consumer electronics, all while living directly above a labyrinth of mine shafts, miles beneath the ocean floor. Yet by the spring of 1974, the entire metropolis was completely evacuated in a matter of weeks. And from there, the city was just left abandoned. So what exactly drove thousands of families to build their life out on this rock with no source of natural water? What forced them to leave overnight? And why has it all been completely abandoned ever since? Stay tuned to find out as we discover the history of Battleship Island. I'm your host Ryan Sokash, and you're watching It's History. Let's go back to a time when Battleship Island was nothing more than a jagged, unremarkable reef. The earliest known records describe it as a tiny, desolate rock. It was essentially a pit stop for local fishermen and a nesting ground for seabirds, completely devoid of vegetation or fresh water. So, in that context, for centuries, nobody really gave it a second thought. However, everything changed in the early 1800s when residents from neighboring islands discovered something hidden beneath the sea floor: coal. At first, people gathered only loose fragments that washed ashore or were dug from shallow pits, but by the late 19th century, when demand was soaring, they looked further. You see, Japan was undergoing a massive cultural and economic shift, and the country was racing to catch up with Western industrial powers. So, to fuel that transition, as well as steamships, factories, and trains, the country desperately needed high-quality fuel. This is where, in 1890, the industrial conglomerate Mitsubishi bought the island, and they planned to transform it into something the world had yet to see. And I want to emphasize here that the geological reality was a massive challenge from the very start, since technically speaking, the coal wasn't really on the island. Rather, it was in vertical seams buried deep under the sea floor. To access that, engineers had to dig vertical shafts straight down through the island's rock, then tunnel horizontally beneath the seabed. And if that sounds crazy, it was. The very first major vertical shafts were known as shaft number 1 and 2, plunging over 100 meters straight into the earth before branching out into a maze of corridors beneath the ocean. The working conditions in the early years were notoriously brutal. Temperatures hovered around 86 degrees Fahrenheit with nearly 95% humidity. And the miners, they faced the constant threat of things like deadly gases, explosions, or catastrophic flooding from the ocean above. Despite those extreme dangers, the initial shafts proved to be incredibly successful. They struck high-grade coal, which was prized at the nearby steelworks. Considering the success, business boomed, and the workforce grew. But expansion was never easy. Consider this: the 16-acre rock could not expand outwards, so it had to grow upward, transforming from a bleak industrial outpost to a dense, futuristic concrete city. At its peak in 1959, the island was home to a staggering 5,259 residents. This created a population density 9 times greater than that of Tokyo at the time. And according to some sources, it was the highest density recorded on Earth. To support inhabitants, the island was neatly divided. The western and northern halves housed the residential blocks, while the eastern and southern halves were entirely industrial. Looming mechanical conveyor belts, sorting complexes, and roaring coal washing stations ran 24/7. And because the space here was so limited, architects planned everything to the centimeter. Even so, the island boasted some unexpected, progressive amenities packed tightly together. There was a multi-story elementary and junior high school, a fully staffed hospital, a movie theater, a town hall, a Buddhist temple, restaurants, bars, parlors, and a public bathhouse. And since there was no soil, residents built their gardens atop the concrete apartment complexes. These gardens were used to grow vegetables and give children a rare patch of green to play on. However, if we put those comforts aside, life on the island was challenging, but it attracted residents because the pay was exceptional. For example, while at the time only about 10% of Japanese people on the mainland owned color televisions in the late 1950s, the ownership on the island was nearly 100%. As for the housing hierarchy, well, Mitsubishi had a plan for that. Bachelor miners lived in single, cramped rooms, married couples got small, multi-room spaces, and senior executives enjoyed spacious, top-floor suites. The commute to work was simple, but if residents wanted to reach the mainland, that required a 40-minute ferry ride. For ordinary residents, there was no daily commute to the mainland. People lived, slept, and played entirely on the island. The only way on or off it, though, was a rough 40-minute ferry ride to the port. The ferry's primary purpose wasn't just for passengers, it was also important for importing food and water. In the early days, Mitsubishi installed a distillation plant. However, this wasn't enough to sustain the booming population. So there came a point that they had to rely on water supply ships that sailed back and forth from the mainland. The water from those ships was pumped into massive storage tanks at the top of the island. Fresh water was so precious that it was strictly rationed, with every household being given a daily water ticket to control the supply. The turning point for this arrived in 1957 with the completion of a pipeline on the ocean floor, delivering roughly 1,000 tons of fresh water daily. With that, for the first time, residents didn't have to worry about delayed ships causing a water crisis. All the same, even with the pipeline, fresh water was prioritized for drinking and cooking only. For other daily activities, such as baths or filling the swimming pool, heated seawater was used. By the 1960s, life here was booming. Everyone had color TVs, rooftop gardens, and modern pipelines. A state of affairs that, let's say, was good while it lasted. By the late 1960s, the downfall was sudden. First, a nationwide shift in energy policy killed demand for coal. As the government initiated an aggressive transition to petroleum, oil was more efficient, cleaner, and cheaper to import than mining from the treacherous vertical shafts under the sea. So when that law was passed, coal mines across the country were doomed. By this time, the underground infrastructure had expanded to a mind-boggling scale. To claim the 15 million plus tons of coal over its lifetime, engineers sank 4 main vertical shafts, with the deepest reaching 2,000 feet into the earth. Considering the scale and the staggering operational cost of maintaining something like that, Battleship Island became impossible for the corporation to justify. The operational scale down was gradual at first, but the final blow landed on January the 15th, 1974, with an official announcement that the mine would be closed forever. And for the residents, this was very bad news, since not only were they losing their jobs, but also their housing. Remember, Mitsubishi owned every single centimeter of the island, so no one had a legal right to claim that they could stay there once the work stopped. The good news was that the company offered financial severance pay and relocation packages to transfer workers to other operations. The transition took just over 3 months, but by April the 20th, 1974, the final group of residents departed, leaving the island to be abandoned forevermore. For the next 3 decades, it just sat in total isolation, morphing from a bustling city to a haunting monument of industrial decay. And it was totally off limits to the general public. Without human maintenance, nature began to violently reclaim whatever was left. Fierce Pacific typhoons smashed through windows, tore down outer walls, and caused entire sections of the older structures to collapse. At the same time, saltwater sprayed over the buildings, rusting any exposed iron rebar from the inside out and causing the concrete to further crumble. And although it was totally forbidden to visit, this eerie, dystopian skyline began to attract curious-minded people. In fact, it became a kind of holy grail for urban explorers to photograph. With that, its reputation began to grow. By 2002, Mitsubishi voluntarily transferred ownership to Nagasaki, transferring the private industrial island into a public historical site. In turn, recognizing the growing fascination with the island, local authorities elected to build secure boat docks and a network of elevated walkways. By April the 22nd, 2009, the island officially opened to tourists for the first time in history. In 2015, Battleship Island was officially designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. However, this status came with massive international tension, since one aspect of the island's story is rather difficult. During the Second World War, Hundreds of prisoners of war were forced into brutal labor in the deep, suffocating underwater mines, and many died there. So, from a regional perspective, not everyone believes that the island deserves such a prestigious designation. Either way, Battleship Island is an amazing story. I really hope that you all liked it. I hope you'll consider subscribing to support the channel. Otherwise, until next time, I'm Ryan Sokash, signing off.